"Don't hold back, please," she whispered. He pulled her close, losing himself in her warmth. He had always believed that life was better when it was quiet. He walked through the streets of the city as if he were invisible, careful not to let anyone get too close. People saw him, of course. They always did. But no one ever really looked at him. He carried himself in a way that said, "I am fine. I am okay." But inside he felt far from okay. Years of disappointment and hurt had taught him to keep his distance. Trust was fragile, and he had learned to protect himself by building walls that no one could climb. She, on the other hand, was a little different. She had a smile that could light up the room, but it was a smile that hid sadness. Life had been unkind to her in small, persistent ways. Friends who promised to be there had drifted away. Family members had sometimes failed to notice her struggles. She had learned early on to carry her emotions quietly, to smile and laugh even when her heart felt heavy. Yet, despite her bravery, she sometimes longed for someone who could see her, not just her face, but her heart. They met on a quiet evening in the city. It was not a dramatic encounter. There was no sudden accident or magical coincidence. He was sitting at a small coffee shop, nursing a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, reading a book that was meant to distract him from his thoughts. She came in carrying a notebook and a bag that had seen too many years of use. She looked tired, but her eyes were bright, and her presence had a warmth that seemed to fill the empty corners of the room. At first, they didn't notice each other. He was focused on the words in his book, trying to lose himself in another world. She sat at a nearby table, sketching quietly in her notebook, capturing shapes and lines that reflected her thoughts. But there was something in the way she concentrated, the way her brows furrowed slightly and her lips pressed together, that drew his attention. It was a subtle pull, almost magnetic. He glanced up without meaning to, and their eyes met. For a moment, there was silence between them that spoke more than any words could. Neither looked away immediately. She gave a small, polite smile, the kind that carries curiosity without expecting anything. He nodded slightly in return, a small gesture of acknowledgement that felt heavier than it should. Something in that simple exchange made both of them pause, though they did not know why. Over the next few days, they began seeing each other in small, ordinary ways. Sometimes it was at the same coffee shop. Other times it was in the park, where the sun filtered through the leaves in golden streams. Each time they met, the conversations were cautious at first, filled with polite questions about books, sketches, or the weather. Yet beneath the surface, something deeper was beginning to form. There was a sense of familiarity, as if their souls recognized each other before their minds could even process it. He noticed little things about her that most people would miss. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking, or the way her eyes softened when she smiled at something that reminded her of a good memory. She, in turn, noticed his quiet attentiveness, the way he listened without judgment, the way he seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts and feelings. They were discovering something rare, a connection that did not demand, a presence that did not press, and a silence that felt safe instead of uncomfortable. But both of them carried fears. He feared that if he let himself care, he would inevitably be hurt. His past experiences had taught him that closeness could lead to loss, and loss was something he was not sure he could survive again. She feared that her openness could be misunderstood, that her vulnerability could be seen as weakness. Life had taught her caution, but her heart longed to take a risk, even if just a little. It was during one quiet afternoon in the park that their relationship began to shift. He had been sitting on a bench, watching the sunlight play across the grass. She sat down next to him, placing her sketchbook on her lap. There was a moment of hesitation, a small pause in which neither spoke, and yet both felt the weight of the unspoken words. He finally said something small, almost trivial, a comment about the way the leaves danced in the wind, but it was enough to open the door. She responded with a laugh, light and genuine, that surprised him. It was not the practiced smile she often wore, but a real laugh, full of warmth and emotion. Something inside him shifted at that moment. He realized that he wanted to hear more, to know more, to be more present in her life. And without understanding why, she realized that she felt the same. There was a spark of hope, small and tentative, but it was there. In the days that followed, their meetings became slightly longer, their conversations a little deeper. They shared stories about their childhoods, the people who had shaped them, the dreams they had carried quietly for years. He spoke of his love for reading and the escape it provided him. She spoke of her art and the way it allowed her to process emotions she could not always put into words. With each story shared, their trust grew, brick by brick. Yet, even as the connection deepened, there was hesitation. He would sometimes withdraw slightly, pulling back when emotions threatened to get too strong. She noticed it, but instead of pushing, she gave him space, knowing that trust could not be forced. And he noticed her patience, her understanding, her gentle persistence that never demanded more than he could give. They were learning to navigate the fragile dance of closeness, understanding that real connection took time and care. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, they found themselves sitting side by side on a park bench. The world around them was quiet, almost as if it had paused to give them this moment. She leaned slightly closer, and he felt the warmth of her presence. She whispered, almost to herself, "Don't hold back, please." It was not a command, not a demand, but a plea, a wish for honesty, openness, and closeness. In that single moment, he realized that he did not have to hide anymore. He could be himself without fear of judgment or rejection. And she realized that he wanted to be there, truly there, beside her, in a way that went beyond words. He reached out and pulled her gently closer, feeling a warmth he had not known in years. It was not just her physical presence, but the emotional closeness that filled the spaces in his heart that had been empty for so long. And in that quiet, unassuming moment, something profound began. A connection rooted in trust, understanding, and shared vulnerability. Neither of them knew what the future would bring. Life was unpredictable, and the past had taught them both to be cautious. But in that moment, it did not matter. What mattered was the here and now, the warmth of a presence that made the world feel less cold, the understanding that they were no longer alone, and the realization that opening one's heart could bring a joy that fear could never take away. And so, in the quiet of the park under the fading sunlight, two lives, both marked by pain, hope, and the desire to be seen, began a journey together. A journey not of grand gestures or dramatic events, but of small, meaningful moments that would shape the rest of their lives. For the first time in a long time, he felt that it was okay to let someone in. And for the first time in a long time, she felt that someone could truly see her, not just her smile, not just her laughter, but her heart. And in that gentle, quiet understanding, something beautiful began, one that would slowly grow into a bond neither of them had dared to imagine before. After that quiet moment in the park, things began to change slowly between them. It was not sudden or dramatic, but subtle and real. They continued to meet, sometimes in the same park, sometimes at the coffee shop where they had first noticed each other. Every time they met, there was a sense of ease that neither of them had felt with anyone else before. It was like stepping into a small, safe world where they could breathe freely and not worry about judgment or misunderstanding. He noticed that she laughed more easily now. It was still the kind of smile that hid past sadness, but it had light in it that wasn't there before. And she noticed that he spoke more openly, sometimes sharing small details about his past or thoughts he had always kept to himself. These small exchanges were the foundation of something stronger, something neither had dared to name yet. One afternoon, they went for a walk along the river. The sunlight reflected off the water, making it sparkle like tiny stars. They walked side by side, not speaking at first, just enjoying the quiet presence of each other. Eventually, he said something about how peaceful the river looked, and she agreed, mentioning how it reminded her of a place from her childhood where she used to spend summers. It was a small detail, but it opened the door to a deeper conversation. She told him stories of her childhood, about the times she had felt lonely and the moments when small acts of kindness had made a big difference. He listened carefully, not interrupting, letting her words fill the space between them. He realized that these stories were not just about memories. They were about trust. She was allowing him into a part of her life that few people had ever seen, and he felt honored and a little nervous at the same time. He shared his own stories too, though more cautiously. He spoke about growing up in a household where emotions were rarely discussed, about friends who had come and gone, and about his love for reading as a way to escape when life felt heavy. She listened with the same care he had shown her. There was a rhythm to their conversation, a balance between giving and listening that made them both feel understood. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when he would withdraw slightly, retreating behind the walls he had built over the years. She noticed it, but instead of becoming frustrated, she learned to wait. She understood that trust could not be forced and that letting someone in required patience. Sometimes she would gently ask a question. Sometimes she would just sit quietly, letting him come to her in his own time. He was learning something new about himself. He realized that it was possible to care deeply about someone without losing control or being hurt. The fear that had guided his life for so long was still there, but it was beginning to shrink, replaced by a quiet hope. And she was learning, too, that opening her heart was not a weakness, but a strength. She could be honest about her feelings and still feel safe. One rainy evening, they found themselves under the small awning of a bookstore, waiting for the rain to stop. The world around them was gray and wet, but in that small space, there was a sense of comfort. They talked about books, about art, about dreams they had never shared with anyone else. He reached out and lightly touched her hand, a small, tentative gesture. She looked at him and smiled, holding his hand gently. It was a simple connection, but it carried more meaning than words could express. As weeks passed, their bond grew stronger. They started sharing everyday moments, coffee in the morning, walks in the park, quiet evenings with books or music. Each of these moments built trust and understanding. They learned each other's routines, preferences, and habits. He noticed how she liked her tea a certain way, how she preferred quiet walks over busy streets. She noticed how he often paused before speaking, thinking carefully about his words, how he had a habit of sketching shapes in his notebook when he was deep in thought. It was in these small moments that they found comfort in each other. They didn't need grand gestures or dramatic declarations to feel connected. Just being together, sharing time and presence was enough. He began to feel that he could rely on her, that she would understand even when he didn't say everything. And she began to feel that she could trust him, that he would not judge her for her past or her emotions. There were also moments of vulnerability that tested their growing bond. One evening, she shared a memory of a painful event from her past, a time when she had felt completely alone. He listened silently, holding her hand and letting her words flow. He did not try to fix anything, did not offer empty reassurances. He simply listened, and in doing so, he gave her a gift she had longed for, a safe space to share her feelings. He, too, revealed a difficult part of his past, a time when he had felt abandoned and uncertain about the future. She listened with care, not interrupting, not judging. Her presence, calm and accepting, made it easier for him to open up than he had ever expected. They realized that vulnerability was not something to fear. It was the bridge that connected them more deeply than casual conversation ever could. Their emotional closeness grew alongside moments of laughter and lightheartedness. They joked about small things, shared funny memories, and teased each other gently. These lighter moments balanced the deeper conversations, making their connection feel natural and complete. They were learning that a strong bond needed both honesty and joy, that trust could grow alongside happiness. One day, during a long walk through a quiet neighborhood, she looked at him and said softly, "I feel like I can tell you anything and you won't run away." He smiled, a little shyly, realizing how much that meant to him. "I feel the same," he replied. I think, I think I've been waiting for this without knowing it." It was a simple exchange, but it carried weight. They both understood that their connection was more than friendship, more than simple companionship. It was a growing intimacy built on respect, trust, and understanding. Neither of them rushed to define it, and yet they both knew that it was becoming something rare and special. Even as their bond strengthened, they still faced moments of doubt. Old fears and insecurities sometimes surfaced, reminding them of past hurt. But instead of letting those fears control them, they faced them together. They learned to communicate, to share their worries, and to reassure each other. And in doing so, their connection became resilient, capable of withstanding the uncertainties of life. By the end of this phase in their story, they had built a quiet, steady foundation. They were not perfect. They still carried fears, past wounds and uncertainties, but they had begun to trust each other in ways that felt new and precious. He had started to understand that closeness did not have to mean pain, and she had begun to see that vulnerability could be shared safely. And in the moments they spent together, whether it was a quiet conversation in a coffee shop, a walk along the river, or simply sitting side by side in silence, they discovered something remarkable. They discovered the true connection was not about grand gestures or dramatic moments. It was about presence, understanding, and the courage to open one's heart despite fear. In those days, their connection was quiet but undeniable. Each meeting, each conversation, each shared laugh or thoughtful silence drew them closer. The world outside might have been chaotic or indifferent, but within their shared space they had found a kind of peace. A space where they could be seen, be heard, and simply exist with another person who understood them. And as the days passed, both of them realized that what had begun as a small, tentative connection was becoming the center of their lives, not in a way that overwhelmed or demanded, but in a way that felt natural, comforting, and essential. They were learning, slowly and carefully, that love, or something very close to it, was not about grand gestures or dramatic passion. It was about trust, patience, and the willingness to be vulnerable. That understanding would guide the next steps of their journey. It would teach them to navigate their emotions, face their fears, and begin to build a bond strong enough to endure life's challenges. And it all started with small, quiet moments, the ones that no one else noticed, but that shaped their hearts forever. The comfort they had built over weeks began to face its first real challenge. Up until now, their meetings had been quiet, gentle, and mostly filled with laughter, stories, or simple silences that felt safe. But life has a way of testing even the strongest bonds. That afternoon, a small misunderstanding occurred, one that neither of them had expected. It began with a message. She had written something thoughtful, hoping to share a moment of her day with him, but he misread the tone. His response, intended to be neutral, came across as distant, almost cold. She felt a flicker of hurt, though she tried to hide it. He did not notice her reaction immediately, lost as he was in his own thoughts and fears. When they met later that day, the tension was there, subtle but undeniable. Words that normally flowed easily now stumbled, hesitant and uncertain. He tried to make casual conversation, but his mind kept returning to the small misunderstanding. She smiled politely, but her eyes betrayed a quiet worry. They both wanted to bridge the gap, but neither knew how to begin. As they walked through the park, a silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. He finally stopped and turned to her, sensing that something needed to be addressed. "Did I say something wrong?" he asked carefully, his voice soft. She looked at him, unsure at first, then nodded slightly. "I think maybe we just misunderstood each other," she said gently. Her words were calm, but they carried weight. He felt a pang of guilt and realized that his own fears were interfering with what they shared. He had become cautious, overthinking small details because of his past. She, too, recognized that her sensitivity had added to the tension. Both of them felt the fragility of trust, realizing that it could be shaken even by small, unintended moments. They sat on a bench by the river, watching the water flow as if it could wash away their uncertainty. For a while, neither spoke, each reflecting on their own emotions. He thought about how much he had started to rely on her presence, how much her understanding had begun to fill gaps in his life he hadn't realized were empty. She thought about how he had become a safe place for her feelings, someone who could hear her without judgment. After a while, he took a deep breath. "I'm sorry," he said simply, looking at her. "I didn't mean to seem distant. I guess I overthink things sometimes." She reached out and placed her hand on his. "It's okay," she replied softly. "We both have our fears. Maybe we just need to be more honest with each other." That moment became a turning point. They realized that vulnerability was not just about sharing happy memories or small secrets. It was also about admitting fears, mistakes, and doubts. They learned that misunderstandings were natural and that the strength of their connection depended not on avoiding conflict, but on facing it together. In the days that followed, they both tried to be more mindful of each other's feelings. He made a conscious effort to respond with warmth, to explain when he felt unsure rather than retreating. She allowed herself to speak more openly, expressing when something bothered her instead of keeping it to herself. These small adjustments were not always easy, but they strengthened the trust between them. One evening, they decided to cook dinner together at her apartment. It was a small, ordinary activity, but it became a test of their ability to work together, communicate, and support each other. He chopped vegetables carefully while she prepared spices, occasionally exchanging playful remarks. At one point, a minor mistake in the recipe caused a small mess, and instead of frustration, they both laughed. It was in these simple, cooperative moments that their bond deepened further, showing that connection could thrive even in ordinary, imperfect circumstances. But emotional challenges continued. One day she shared a story about a past relationship, one that had ended painfully and left her hesitant to trust fully. He listened closely, feeling a mixture of empathy and fear. He understood why she carried these memories with her, but he also worried that her past might overshadow what they were building together. Still, he chose to listen, to hold space for her feelings without trying to change them. He, too, faced moments of self-doubt. There were times when he wondered if he was capable of giving her what she deserved. His past had taught him caution, and sometimes he questioned whether he could truly open his heart without being hurt. She noticed these moments not with judgment, but with understanding. She offered gentle reassurance, showing him that vulnerability was not weakness, and that he could take his time to grow into trust. Their connection became a delicate balance of support and patience. They celebrated small victories, moments when they were able to communicate openly, when laughter returned after tension, when silence was comfortable rather than awkward. Each of these moments reinforced the growing intimacy between them, teaching them that real relationships required effort, understanding, and empathy. One particularly challenging afternoon, a minor disagreement about plans could have escalated into something more serious. They were both tired and emotionally raw, and the words spoken at first carried sharper edges than intended. But instead of allowing the argument to create distance, they paused. He suggested taking a walk to cool off, and she agreed. During that walk, they shared their frustrations calmly, explaining their feelings and listening to each other without interruption. By the end of the walk, the tension had dissolved, replaced by mutual understanding and respect. It was through these experiences that they learned the true nature of intimacy. It was not only about being physically close, but about being emotionally present, navigating conflicts together and offering support even when it was uncomfortable. They discovered that trust could grow stronger through challenges, and that vulnerability, when met with care, could deepen connection instead of causing harm. During one quiet evening, as they sat on the balcony watching the city lights, she rested her head on his shoulder. "I'm glad we are honest with each other," she whispered. He held her a little closer, feeling the warmth of her presence. "Me too," he replied. "I've realized that letting someone in, it's not as scary as I thought. With you, it feels safe." That safety became the foundation for the next stage of their journey. They both realized that the real challenge of connection was not the excitement of new moments, but the courage to stay present through uncertainty, fear, and emotional complexity. They were learning that love, or whatever bond was forming between them, was not a fleeting feeling. It was a series of choices, small and deliberate, to remain open, patient, and caring. They continued to grow together, sharing daily experiences, dreams, and small personal victories. He learned to anticipate her needs without being asked, noticing when she was tired or stressed, and offering support quietly. She learned to trust his actions, to see that his care was consistent and sincere. The rhythm of their lives began to align, creating a sense of partnership that felt natural and comforting. One afternoon, while sitting by the river, he noticed her staring at the water thoughtfully. "What are you thinking?" he asked gently. She smiled softly. "I'm thinking about how different life feels now. I don't feel so alone anymore." He nodded, understanding completely. "I feel the same. I didn't know how much I needed someone to just be here with me." It was in these small, unremarkable moments that their bond deepened the most. They did not need grand declarations or dramatic gestures. Simply being present for each other, offering understanding, laughter, and quiet support was enough to strengthen the connection. Each day, they became more comfortable showing who they truly were, trusting that the other would accept them without judgment. By the end of this phase, they had experienced their first real test, a moment when misunderstandings, fears, and past experiences could have driven them apart. But instead of retreating, they faced the challenge together, learning the importance of patience, communication, and emotional presence. It was a lesson that would serve as the foundation for the deeper intimacy they were beginning to feel, one that would continue to grow as they navigated life together. And in that quiet, shared understanding, they realized something remarkable. Connection was not about perfection. It was about showing up, listening, and being honest, even when it was uncomfortable. It was about trusting that the other person would not leave when fears or doubts arose, and it was about allowing oneself to feel deeply, knowing that the presence of someone who cared could transform even ordinary moments into something meaningful and unforgettable. After the challenges they had faced together, a new sense of closeness began to grow between them. It was subtle at first, like the warmth of sunlight gradually filling a cold room. They had learned how to communicate, how to navigate misunderstandings, and how to trust each other. But now something deeper was emerging, an emotional closeness that went beyond conversation and comfort. It began on a quiet evening as they sat in her apartment with soft music playing in the background. The day had been ordinary, filled with errands, work, and small routines, but there was an unspoken feeling that something important was about to happen. She was sitting on the sofa, sketchbook in hand, drawing shapes and lines that mirrored her thoughts. He was beside her, reading quietly, but his attention kept drifting to her. He noticed how her hair caught the light, how her eyes focused intently on the page, and how her lips twitched slightly when she smiled at her own work. He felt a sudden urge to reach out, not in any dramatic way, but to simply be closer, to share in the quiet intimacy of the moment. He put down his book and turned toward her. "May I see?" he asked softly. She looked up, surprised but pleased, and handed him the sketchbook. He studied the drawings, not just the shapes, but the care and emotion behind each line. "These are beautiful," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "You capture so much in something so simple." She blushed slightly, feeling both seen and appreciated in a way that went deeper than mere words. The conversation shifted naturally from art to life, dreams, and fears. She spoke about hopes she had long kept to herself, dreams of traveling to faraway places and making a difference in small ways. He shared his own aspirations, ideas he had thought no one would ever understand. In that quiet space, they discovered a new level of trust. They were not just talking, they were sharing pieces of their hearts, letting each other see the parts that had always been hidden. It was during that evening that she noticed a hesitation in him, a subtle tension that he could no longer fully hide. "You seem quiet," she said gently. "Is something bothering you?" He paused, realizing she had noticed what he had tried to conceal. For a moment he considered brushing it off, pretending everything was fine. But the warmth in her eyes, the calm presence she offered, gave him courage. "I guess I'm afraid," he admitted quietly. "Afraid that if I let myself care too much, I might lose it. I've lost people before, and I don't want to lose you too." She reached out and placed her hand over his, a gesture of reassurance and understanding. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered. "We're here, together. And we don't have to be perfect. We just need to be honest with each other." Her words were simple, but they carried a weight that lifted a burden he had carried for years. He felt a warmth spread through his chest, a mixture of relief and hope. He realized that this was what he had been longing for, a connection where he could be fully himself, without fear or pretense. And in that realization, something shifted. He pulled her gently closer, not in a rush, but in a gesture of comfort and trust. She leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder. The feeling was more than physical closeness. It was emotional safety, a shared understanding that they could be vulnerable without losing each other. In that moment, all the walls he had built around his heart began to crumble. They stayed like that for a long time, simply enjoying the presence of each other. There was no need for words, no pressure to explain feelings that were already understood. The silence was not empty. It was full of trust, warmth, and connection. He felt himself letting go of old fears, letting himself feel fully in a way he had not done in years. She felt the same, realizing that being seen and accepted for who she was felt more powerful than anything else in the world. Over the next few days, their closeness deepened further. They began spending more time together in ordinary activities, yet each moment felt extraordinary. Cooking meals together became a small ritual of shared effort and laughter. Walking in the park turned into quiet conversations that revealed layers of personality, humor, and emotion. Even mundane errands, like grocery shopping, became opportunities to connect, to notice each other, and to care in small ways. One rainy afternoon, they found themselves at a local library, browsing books and quietly discussing favorite authors. She picked up a novel and smiled. "I always thought you would like this one," she said. He took the book and looked at her, surprised. "You remember?" she asked. "I pay attention to the things you like," she replied softly. He felt a warmth he could not describe, the realization that someone truly noticed him, not just superficially, but with understanding and care. That evening, after returning to her apartment, they sat together reading in silence. Occasionally, they would comment on a passage or a character, but mostly they were content with the quiet company. The intimacy of these moments, free from drama or expectation, became the foundation of a bond that was steadily growing stronger. They learned that closeness was not always about excitement. It was about consistency, understanding, and presence. One night, she shared a particularly personal memory, one she had never told anyone before. It was about a time she had felt deeply alone, when she had questioned her worth and ability to trust others. He listened without interruption, holding her hand as she spoke. He did not offer empty words of reassurance. He simply let her speak, and felt her feelings alongside her. By the end of the story, she felt lighter, knowing that someone had truly heard her. He, too, opened up more than ever. He spoke about a period in his life when he had felt isolated and misunderstood, a time when he had doubted his ability to connect with anyone. She listened patiently, never judging, never rushing him. The act of being fully present for each other created a bond that was both comforting and exhilarating. They were learning that trust and emotional closeness could transform lives, turning loneliness into shared warmth. Their connection also began to show in subtle gestures and routines. He learned to notice when she was tired, offering small comforts: a cup of tea, a warm blanket, a reassuring smile. She began to recognize his needs, providing quiet encouragement and space when he needed it. These small acts of care, unnoticed by anyone else, became the silent language of their growing intimacy. It was during one evening, as they watched the sunset from her balcony, that the emotional breakthrough became undeniable. The sky was painted in shades of pink and gold, reflecting off the buildings and streets below. She rested her head on his shoulder again, and he felt a deep sense of peace. "I feel safe with you," she whispered. He held her closer, a smile spreading across his face. I feel the same. I didn't know this kind of closeness was possible." They spent the next few hours talking about their hopes for the future, not in grand, unrealistic terms, but in ways that felt tangible and real. They discussed places they wanted to visit, skills they wanted to learn, and ways they could support each other through challenges. Every word, every gesture reinforced the emotional connection that had grown between them. By the end of that night, it was clear to both of them that something profound had begun. They were no longer just two people spending time together. They were partners in a shared journey, connected by trust, understanding, and the courage to be vulnerable. They had faced fears, navigated misunderstandings, and allowed themselves to be seen. And in doing so, they had created a bond that felt both strong and gentle, resilient and tender. The next days continued to strengthen that bond. Ordinary routines, making tea, walking in the park, sharing books, became opportunities to notice and care for each other. They laughed together, comforted each other, and slowly, effortlessly, became an integral part of each other's lives. Every small moment was infused with meaning, a reminder that true closeness was built not on grand gestures, but on presence, empathy, and shared experience. And through it all, they discovered a truth that both had longed for without knowing it. Love, or the kind of connection that comes from trust and vulnerability, was not about perfection. It was about showing up, being present, listening, and caring. It was about letting go of fear and allowing oneself to feel fully, knowing that someone else would be there to hold that feeling safely. By the end of part 4, they had achieved something remarkable. They had moved past initial hesitation, misunderstandings, and fear. They had embraced vulnerability, deepened their emotional intimacy, and learned to support each other in ways that made both feel safe and valued. They were not perfect, nor was their journey complete, but they had reached a level of closeness that few people ever experience. And in that quiet, shared understanding, they realized that the most profound moments of connection were not the loud or dramatic ones, but the gentle, consistent, and patient ones. The kind of moments that allowed two people to truly see and accept each other, creating warmth and trust that could withstand the uncertainties of life. After weeks of growing closeness, shared stories, and quiet understanding, their connection reached a point that neither of them could ignore. It was no longer just a gentle bond. They had become a part of each other's lives in ways that mattered deeply. Each day was no longer just about passing time. It was about noticing, appreciating, and supporting each other in ways that were both ordinary and extraordinary. The morning sun streamed through her apartment window as they sat together over breakfast, sipping warm tea and talking about the day ahead. He noticed the way she stirred her cup slowly, a small gesture he had come to recognize and cherish. She noticed how he focused intently on her words, nodding thoughtfully as if each sentence mattered. It was in these small, repeated actions that the depth of their relationship showed itself. They had reached a point where silence was comfortable, where words were not always needed to communicate feelings. A shared glance, a subtle touch of the hand, or a soft smile was enough to convey understanding. They had learned the language of presence, the ability to be fully with someone without distraction, judgment, or expectation, and it had become their favorite way of connecting. One afternoon, they went for a walk through the old part of the city, where the streets were narrow and lined with small shops and cafes. The air smelled faintly of bread from a nearby bakery, mixed with the scent of rain from an earlier shower. As they walked, they talked about simple things, favorite childhood memories, stories about family, and hopes for the future. But beneath the casual conversation, there was a quiet depth. Every story, every laugh, every pause reinforced their emotional bond. They stopped at a small park where children played and the sunlight glimmered on the leaves. She sat on a bench taking in the scene, while he stood nearby watching her watch the world. "You see things differently," he said softly, approaching her. She looked up at him and smiled. "I notice things," she replied. "But mostly, I notice you." The words were simple, but they carried a warmth and honesty that made him pause. For a moment, they both just sat there, letting the moment settle between them. It was clear to both of them that the trust and closeness they had developed had changed the way they viewed life. Ordinary moments, sharing tea, walking in the park, or even just sitting together in silence, had taken on new meaning. Life was no longer something to pass through alone. It was something to experience together, with awareness, care, and presence. They understood that connection was built not on grand gestures, but on consistency, patience, and shared attention. Their relationship had also strengthened their individual growth. He found himself more open to expressing emotions he had long buried. Fear no longer controlled him in the same way. He could show care and vulnerability without feeling weak. She found herself more confident in trusting someone completely, realizing that opening her heart was not a risk, but a choice that could bring profound joy. Together they became stronger, not just as a couple, but as individuals. One evening they attended a local art exhibition. She was drawn to the paintings, admiring the colors and brushstrokes, while he wandered beside her, listening to her observations and insights. When she spoke, he felt his admiration for her grow even deeper, not just for her perspective on art, but for the way she carried herself thoughtfully, with a genuine interest in the world. "You always notice the little details," he said softly. She looked at him, smiling. "I notice what matters," she replied, and he realized that she was noticing him in ways he had never been seen before. The weeks continued with the same rhythm: quiet moments, shared experiences, small gestures of care. They learned to anticipate each other's needs: a blanket when one was cold, a comforting word when one felt overwhelmed, or simply a gentle presence when words were unnecessary. It was these small acts, repeated over time, that strengthened the foundation of their bond. They understood that love and trust were cultivated slowly, through consistent care and attention. One night, as they sat on her balcony watching the city lights, they reflected on how far they had come. The journey had not always been easy. There had been moments of doubt, misunderstanding, and fear, but those challenges had not driven them apart. They had brought them closer. They realized that facing challenges together was part of what made their connection real and resilient. They had built a relationship rooted in trust, patience, and shared vulnerability, something far more meaningful than superficial romance. She rested her head against his shoulder and sighed contentedly. "I feel safe with you," she whispered. "Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I never thought I could feel this way." He gently held her, feeling the same sense of security and warmth. "I feel the same," he replied. "Being with you makes me believe that it's possible to trust fully, without fear." They sat in silence for a long time, letting the words sink in, letting the shared peace fill them completely. Their relationship also became a source of inspiration for other aspects of their lives. He began to take more risks, pursuing interests and projects he had avoided due to fear of failure or judgment. She became more confident in expressing her creativity, sharing her art and ideas with a wider audience. Together, they realized that love and support could give courage and motivation to face challenges that might have seemed impossible alone. One particularly memorable afternoon, they took a short trip to the countryside. The air was fresh, the sky a clear blue, and the fields stretched endlessly in every direction. They walked hand in hand along a small path, laughing and talking about everything and nothing. At one point, they paused to sit under a large oak tree, watching the clouds drift lazily across the sky. In that simple moment, surrounded by nature, they felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for each other, but for the quiet beauty of life itself. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, their bond continued to strengthen. They learned that true intimacy was not measured by dramatic events, but by the accumulation of small, meaningful experiences. Every conversation, every act of kindness, and every shared moment of silence became part of the fabric of their connection. They were no longer just two people in each other's lives. They had become an essential part of each other's world. One evening, as they returned from a long walk in the city, they stopped by the river to watch the sunset. The sky was ablaze with colors, orange, pink, and gold reflecting on the water. She leaned into him, and he put his arm around her, feeling the warmth of her presence. "I never imagined life could feel like this," she said softly. "Full and calm and right." He smiled, knowing exactly what she meant. "It's because we're facing it together," he replied. Every day we're choosing to be present, to care, and to trust. The culmination of their journey was not a dramatic event or a single moment of revelation. It was the steady, enduring understanding that they had built something rare, a bond founded on honesty, patience, and shared vulnerability. They had learned to face fears, overcome doubts, and open their hearts fully. They had created a space where both could grow, heal, and feel deeply loved. In the quiet moments of their life together, they realized that they had discovered something more valuable than they had imagined, a true partnership, one where support, understanding, and empathy were constant, where challenges were faced together, and where emotional presence mattered more than words. It was a love not measured by grand gestures or dramatic events, but by consistency, care, and the courage to be vulnerable. As they walked home that evening hand in hand, they understood that the journey was ongoing. Life would continue to bring challenges, uncertainties, and unexpected moments, but they were no longer afraid to face them because they had each other. And in that shared courage, in that quiet, enduring companionship, they found the kind of fulfillment that both had longed for without knowing it.